Don't trip, you know? I know things is hard right now. You looking for a job. You out there hustling. Money gonna come your way, just don't trip. You gotta keep your shoes tied.
Okay, this is the Russell Poole theory, part 8. And now there's been this huge altercation that's happened in New York. And it's time for the death row crowd to come back. Snoop, knife and fork in each hand, thinks he's going to be killed, gets off the plane, and he only wants to know one thing from Tupac. Are you coming to Vegas, cuz? Are you coming to Vegas, cuz? Are you coming to Vegas, cuz? And we know that Snoop was involved because we had Daz on a Vlad TV interview say he was supposed to go to Vegas that night, but Snoop told him, hold on, don't fuck this up. And so that tells us that Snoop did have involvement in the murder of Tupac and the targeting of Suge Knight. And he had motive. He owed Death Row Records $6 million, and he was going to have to pay that back before he ever saw a nickel from the record label. You have Kevin Gaines, pissed off. He's been driven to a hole in the desert with his girlfriend, and they're stripped naked and left for dead. Pissed off. You have David Kenner, who's been disparaged by Suge Knight. Pissed off. You have record label, too much attention on Death Row Records. Probably pissed off. You have crime families, probably pissed off. Too much attention, too many album covers, magazine covers, newspaper articles, interviews on television, too much flash, too much glitz, and it's bringing too much attention, and there's now this probe into Death Row Records. Let's say Suge Knight and Tupac were both killed that night. What would have happened to that money laundering, drug trafficking probe that was into Death Row Records? It probably just would have simply gone away. The target of that was clearly Suge Knight. It was just shares in Death Row Records that could have easily been sold to Interscope, to Universal, or to another record label, and the price tag would have been huge because of what Death Row Records had going on. If Death Row Records had been handed off to competent management inside the music business at the time Tupac and Suge were shot, he could have done with that record label was endless. But what ends up happening is that the thing is botched. And there's all kinds of planning that goes on in an event like this, but there are things you just can't account for. And what we know from the confession letter is that David Kenner and Reggie Wright Jr. go to a gang summit to find shooters. Why do they want shooters from a gang? Because they want somebody to cut this off and seal it off if they're caught. You just don't know what's going to happen in an event like this. So let's say Buntry had a gun and Buntry pulls out his gun and he shoots and he kills the driver of the Cadillac. You have to be able to cut loose the shooter in an event like this. And so they needed shooters that they could cut loose. They go to a gang summit, they get permission to kill Suge Knight and Tupac Shakur, and they hire the shooters. And according to the confession letter, those shooters are Little Half Dead, Danny and Malcolm Patton. And so those shooters are picked, and they're going to place Suge Knight and Tupac in the crosshairs. They're going to have every opportunity to be successful, but there's still that human element. We have bullets that have trajectories. We have metal in the car. We have glass. We don't know exactly what's going to happen when the bullets hit this car. Are they going to penetrate? Are they going to actually hit their mark? And turns out it was poor planning on their part, because the ammunition, as they shoot through doors, it doesn't really go all the way through. And so we have a botched assassination. But we have a timetable. We have a school play. We have actors in the school play. We have Orlando Anderson staged right at the edge of the casino so that Tupac can get his fight on, and he's not going to get sucked into the casino where they'll never be able to get him out. We have we've got to go over to Suge's house. We got to undress. We got to change in the hotel. So these things take up time, and there's a clock. We have Michael Moore refuses to disarm. We have George Kalisis, a mob attorney that disarms all of the bodyguards, part of Oscar's organization in Las Vegas. Nothing could have happened in Las Vegas without permission. Remember, gangs, the mafia, all of that functions with permission. So if they didn't have permission, they couldn't do it. Oscar's organization, remember that. Nothing could have happened in Las Vegas unless Oscar's organization was in on it. We were told by Detective Gordon Martins that you can get anything you want in Vegas. I was told by MGM Security that you can get anything that you want in Las Vegas, including security tapes at the MGM Grand Hotel. There's an issue with the security tape. There's a minute gap, and so we find out that those security tapes actually got edited together afterwards by a Hollywood editor, and that's what gets presented in the court. MGM Grand is pissed off about that. They didn't officially let those tapes out. That was part of the school play. That was part of a payoff. And there was money there to be able to pay off a number of people to commit the murder of Tupac Shakur and the murder of Suge Knight, which is what they wanted to happen that night. So where does this happen? It happens at the intersection of Koval and Flamingo. And we know from our staff sergeant that these are military-grade operations. We look at security for convoys and how to actually orchestrate something like this. You have to have an area of observation above the site where you have somebody that's actually quarterbacking this. And in this case, there is that parking structure that looks right down on that intersection, so it was perfect. You have bike cops. They may not have been in on the entire murder, but they were certainly in on pulling over Suge Knight and holding him until they got the all clear, and everything was in preparation. They let him go. A minute later, he's shot. You have the final picture of Tupac and Suge, and that's shot by somebody who works for Dre and works on Straight Outta Compton, works in the movie business. This is just like a movie set, where you have cops locking things up, probably holding traffic. They let the shooters go right after the cops let Suge and Tupac go, and it's orchestrated for them to do the drive-by. You get 6 barricades. Those 6 barricades are 3 cars on the left-hand side, 1 car in front, 1 car behind, and the shooters make up the 6th barricade. That's talked about in the confession letter. And what happens? They miss. But there's a full 90 seconds where the car is stopped, where it looks like they did hit. There were 13 rounds that get fired. There were 2 different guns that fired. One of the guns jammed. That's a 3rd gun. 2 guns were supposed to take out Suge Knight. 1 gun was supposed to take out Tupac. The gun that takes out Tupac is a Glock. That arm is a dark arm that's extended from the Cadillac. That matches with the confession letters. Little Half Dead is being the shooter of Tupac Shakur. And they shoot 13 shots, 90 seconds, the car sits idle, and everybody thinks Suge Knight and Tupac are dead. Nate Dogg is in a chase vehicle talking to Daz on the cell phone, giving a blow-by-blow of exactly how things went down, and he says to Daz that Tupac and Suge are both dead. The word goes out in a number of places that Tupac and Suge are dead. Over the radios comes "Got 'em." Michael Moore standing next to Reggie Wright Jr. when he hears "Got 'em" come over the radio. He hears David Kenner's voice come over the radio saying, "Don't say nothing over the radio." And then Reggie Wright Jr. calls out to everybody and says, "Hey, shut down your radios." So clearly, this is what happened that night. Now, 90 seconds later, the car starts up again. It's running on its rims, and it drives a couple of miles to the intersection of Harmon and Las Vegas Boulevard, where The car stops, and that's where Suge and Tupac are treated. And what happens? Tupac Shakur is taken not to the hospital that's just a couple miles away. No, he's taken to the furthest hospital in Las Vegas. Why? Because EMTs and cops don't like Tupac. They want to see him bleed out. Russell Poole talked about being involved in the cleanup and evidence collecting at the very famous North Hollywood Bank of America robbery. And one of the suspects in that case had been shot and required medical treatment. Not one cop would give that suspect medical treatment. They all stood around and let that man bleed out. Why? Because they could. Here was a man who had pointed guns at cops, shot at cops, shot cops, and they weren't going to see this guy suing the city or suing the LAPD or even getting off with a light sentence for the bank robbery and the murders. And so it's the same thing with Tupac. And by the way, when we find out that the Inglewood cop that said, oh, I know right where there's a hospital, and he drives Biggie around, we find out he drives Biggie on a wild goose chase. Why? Because they just didn't like people that did this kind of music. And they didn't like especially Tupac because he was labeled as a cop killer. More later.
Making sure I hold down the last name doors. It's been wild like a wild force, but I bet God got something better for us. We just gotta get together. Unity is everything. To my people, man. Struggle been real too long. Our OGs been through it, so it's time for us to make a change. And I promise I'm not gonna die until I change this. I got a baby girl in this world, so I ain't got no choice. Y'all either gonna take me out or ride with me, and I put that on everything.
Hard times and haters, yeah, but that's okay.